Mark Bowen, the original chess ninja here, and I'm continuing my game analysis with game 3. But my third game, which I'm about to show you, I got white again, and I opened with f4, which is considered to be the bird opening. I played the Dutch defense against d4 as black, so the bird is also very similar to that in a strategic sense. So this was my game against Sidharth Suresh, and he replied d5. So I'm basically playing as if I'm playing the Dutch defense against white's d4, but I have a move in hand, an extra move since I'm really playing white. The colors are reversed. I played g3. One of the moves that I find annoying against this system is bishop to g4. So for that reason I'm trying to develop my bishop before I develop my knight to f3. He plays knight f6, I play bishop to g2, and he plays e6, which could potentially lock in his bishop on c8, but it releases the bishop on f8. I play knight to f3, and he plays knight to c6. Moves from black give me the impression that he's not really playing a standard system, and that can be dangerous because, for instance, the move knight c6 can end up blocking the c5 pawn, which can make it difficult for him to develop his pieces later on. Likewise, the move e6, which he played, can hamper the c8 bishop. So sometimes when you are being creative, you play substandard moves. I continue playing pretty much standard Leningrad Dutch type moves, but I'm playing with the white pieces. So if the Leningrad Dutch is good against d4, I'm pretty sure that the opening I'm playing is pretty sound up to this point. And now a strange move, but quite common in many of these type of systems. I play my queen slightly over to e1. Reason being, I want to control the e file, especially the e4 and e5 squares. I want to be able to push my pawn there. He plays bishop to c5. After having already developed the bishop, he moves it twice. And this move in combination with knight to g4, if I had moved my king over to h1, it could be quite dangerous. So for that reason, I decide to sort of switch up my system now, and I'm going for more of a Stonewall type structure with pawns on d4, e3, f4, and also c3. Of course, in the Stonewall you would not normally have a fianchetted bishop, but that's the structure I'm going for now. So d4, and his bishop on b6, although it's hitting latently against my king, it's facing a very strong Stonewall. And of course, people in Jamaica know that the Stonewall's attack was championed by the great Humphrey Gale. He played the Stonewall with white, the Stonewall attack. He played that opening pretty much religiously, and he had exceptionally good results with it. So because he has beaten me many times, I'm able to play that system very well now. So that's what I'm trying to do in this game. At this juncture, I begin to notice that as typical in these Stonewall type structures, the bishop on c1 is somewhat the problem child. In this case, I get the brilliant idea of developing it to a3, and my opponent actually doesn't see what I'm doing. He doesn't seem to realize the danger. He castles. So immediately I'm able to skewer his queen against his rook. When he moves the queen, of course, I grab the rook. What was surprising to me when I analyzed the game, though, is that despite being up material here, if you put this on a engine, you'll find that the position is actually quite even still. The reason for this is really that the position is so closed up that black doesn't really have any noticeable weak points, and it will take white a long time to really open up the position. So despite being down material, the game is actually quite even at this juncture. Another point to note is that black has the two bishops, which is considered a slight advantage in most positions. But here the position is actually very close, so the black squared bishop, which is a big asset for black, is actually restricted by my pawns, all of them on these dark colors, on the dark squares. Game continued. I'm just trying to develop and also maybe thinking of opening up the position to get my pieces active. And he plays rook to e8. Now I open up the game with e4. Whenever you have a material advantage, it's good if you can bring those extra pieces into the attack. Or if you can exchange pieces, the remaining pieces become that much more significant. So with each exchange, I'm feeling a bit closer to victory here. And now I begin to realize there's some play with moves like c4 and c5. I could perhaps trap his bishop on b6. If I play the immediate c4, however, his knight has a lovely square on b4. Also, playing c4 immediately would make my d4 pawn very weak. So I decide to play rook to d1, defending the d4 pawn somewhat. He plays an aggressive move, but he has to do something to bring out his pieces and to get active, so he plays f5. And now I realize my knight can probably re-maneuver back all the way to the king side, so I play over here knowing that he'll kick me back. And although my knight has been placed somewhat on the rim, I know that by playing it to f2 later, it should be quite active in the game, controlling central squares and helping to protect my king. Black now plays queen to f6. He seems to be targeting the d4 pawn and trying to utilize his slight advantage on the dark squares because of having a dark squared bishop, whereas white has none. However, at this juncture I play knight e5, threatening both his knight and to swap off his knight on c6. Either one of those moves would be advantageous to me, but he prefers to keep his bishop, so he takes off my knight with his knight. And now I capture with that pawn. His queen is no longer pressuring the dark squares in the center because it has to retreat to f7. And at this point I decide to go for my pawn expansion, possibly trapping the bishop on b6. So I play the move c4, and it becomes quite tricky for black to know how is he going to respond. If he moves the knight back, then I push c5 and his bishop dies. So he opted to at least go down fighting with bishop take d4. At least he gets a pawn for his bishop. And when I recapture, his knight is able to retreat to b6. So of course I have a one position here technically because I'm up quite a bit of material and have no major weakness in my position. It's hard for him to even find counterplay here. I have the immediate move bishop take b7. Nothing is wrong with grabbing that pawn. However, I began to notice that his knight on b6 is very restricted, and one of the pieces, I should say, that is protecting the bishop on d7. So I begin to notice the vulnerability of the knight on b6, and I decide to highlight that with the move a4. If I'm able to kick his knight back with a5, then when the knight moves, it would take one of the defenders of the bishop out of play. He plays queen to e7, hoping to activate his queen on the dark squares on my queen side. I keep control of the b4 square with the move queen to d2, but now this queen move also pressures the bishop on d7. Black plays queen to c5, pinning my rook on d4. And now I retreat the knight, blocking the pin, so that my rook is free to move. Once the rook is free to move, I'm actually threatening this bishop on d7 yet again. And it's tricky for black to know how to defend that if possible. He opts to move. He should have opted to move his bishop to c6, but instead he grabs a pawn in the center. And now I kicked his knight. So realizing that with the knight retreat he would drop another piece, and that his game has been pretty much going downhill from day one, black resigned at this point. So that was game 3 for me. A pretty straightforward win against a younger opponent. Thank you very much for watching.